Good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Wes Adrianson, and I'm a project manager with the Clinton Climate Initiative and the CGI Action Network. I'm so glad that you all are able to join us for this critical conversation on energy preparedness and renewable energy in the Caribbean. This is part of a broader CGI webinar series on preparedness for the 2020 hurricane season. For those new to the CGI Action Network, we're so glad to have you. It's great to see a lot of familiar names already in the group chat and on the attendees list here. The network, as a lot of you know, includes over 750 organizations from across sectors working to advance hurricane recovery in the Caribbean and promote long-term resiliency. CGI aims to foster collaboration, sharing of knowledge and best practices, and sustain momentum towards this work. So we're now a week into another hurricane season. This is another situation where we have islands that have contributed the least to the climate crisis, facing the injustice of yet another season of potentially threatening climate change-driven storms. And as we all know, energy infrastructure is particularly vulnerable to these events. This year, of course, the Caribbean is facing a hurricane season while it is already grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that this is a time of compounded risk when disruptions to energy at places like hospitals could cause dire consequences. Community organizations, utilities, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector have made significant strides towards integrating resilience into energy systems, and there is a lot of work still to be done. We're seeing efforts to harden infrastructure, add renewable energy to reduce dependence on diesel supply chains, and support communities in their efforts to develop microgrids at facilities that are just too important to go without power. For example, in Puerto Rico, we've seen resilient solar and storage installed at least 400 critical facilities, including hospitals and health clinics, since Hurricane Maria. We're about to hear from some really amazing speakers who are going to discuss different approaches they're taking to advance energy preparedness with the upcoming hurricane season and consider the role of renewable energy as a pillar of the long-term economic recovery. I hope that these conversations are additive, generative, and help contribute to impactful new collaborations in this effort. All right, so let's dive in. First, I want to thank our panelists so much for joining us, all who are doing very impactful work to contribute to energy preparedness. First, we have Alejandra Castrodad Rodriguez, Executive Director of Resilient Power Puerto Rico. We have Will Hegard, Director of Footprint Project. Charlotte Gazette Navarro, Senior Director of Puerto Rico Operations for Hispanic Federation. And Rochelle Roulette, Vice President of Strategic Planning, Innovation, and Technology at Fortis TCI. So we're going to start with a panel discussion, and I'm going to field some questions. We're going to end with a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. So if you have questions for the panelists, please feel free to add those in the Q&A function here on the Zoom call. Okay, great. So my first question is related to these challenges that we're facing right now. In the current context of both the COVID-19 pandemic and the hurricane season, which is now underway, why is energy preparedness so important, and how are you and your organization addressing this challenge? So I'd love to start with you, Rochelle, and Turks and Caicos as the electric utility serving these islands. How are you seeing these challenges play out, and what preparedness measures have you been taking? Oh, Rochelle, I think you're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for that. Thank you, Wes, for inviting me to be part of this discussion. The current pandemic has created unprecedented global crisis affecting public health, mobility, economy, and as well as energy usage. And basically, in this modern era, we are all reliant to electricity-powered equipment and tools. The medical facilities required power. Those who needs to stay at home needs power for their daily tasks. We needed to stay connected for work purpose or to stay in touch with friends and family. And we as Fortis TCI, as an electricity service provider in Turks and Caicos, we have a big role in keeping the stability of this very important service for the country. So right now we are maintaining our usual highly reliable service. So that is how we are doing our role in this pandemic period.
Great, thank you so much, Rochelle. And Charlotte, how about you over at Hispanic Federation? How are you all facing these kind of compounding challenges, and where do your solutions lie in this kind of complicated field?
Sure. Well, just some context for those who don't really know Puerto Rico, in Puerto Rico, we have the highest rate of poverty here compared to any U.S. state. We're nearly double the next poverty rate, which would be Mississippi. Puerto Rico's at over 44%. So I think we need to kind of put the context of health also within how health is impacted by poverty. Thinking about Maria, and how we saw over 3,000 people who died as a result of Maria. And in most of those cases, or in many of those cases, it was because of a lack of an ability to access healthcare, or because you no longer had the power that you needed in your home to provide the energy to the machines that keep you alive. And we also have a very challenged public health infrastructure here on the island, including a lot of medical professionals who have left the island for economic reasons. So all of that is kind of our context to face hurricanes, to face the pandemic. But on the positive side, Puerto Rico also has a lot of mutual aid. A long history of mutual aid on the island, a powerful network of community leaders and nonprofit organizations, and included within that are federally qualified health centers. So our approach to working on energy and resiliency and addressing health over these last 2.5 years, and as we enter into another hurricane season, has been to look towards that network of community leaders, to look towards that spirit of mutual aid, and to work with those nonprofit organizations. And so we've really prioritized a couple of areas when it comes to thinking about energy resiliency. And the first is health and public safety. We've also thought about how do we address food security as it affects your health as well, right? And then your community resiliency. And so all of those things really coming together. And so some of the ways that we have worked in these last few years and continue to work to complete those projects that have been started really is one, a project that actually we work on with Clinton Foundation and Solar Foundation is our Solar Saves Lives initiative, where we're working with the federally qualified health centers on the island, of which there are over 22. And when you add all of their satellite clinics as well, we have over 99 clinics serving 67 of the 78 municipalities here on the island. So that was one of our immediate priorities after just 3 months after the hurricane. We began investing there and then expanded that investment with this Solar Saves Lives project to provide renewable energy to those centers. We realized that those centers after Hurricane Maria were lifesavers, literally, for the communities that they serve, of which are some of the most extreme poverty, people living in some of the most extreme poverty on the island. And so by providing them energy, we can make sure that both in a time like right now in the pandemic, when we're seeing regular power outages because of our weak energy grid, as well as we go into the hurricane season, that those centers can continue to provide healthcare to the people who need it most. Also looking at how do we provide energy to people who are medically vulnerable, and please excuse the background noise.
No worries.
There is People are celebrating their graduations right now, so everybody drives past with their graduation celebration. This is graduation in the midst of a pandemic. So people thinking about people who are medically vulnerable, and as I mentioned, who rely on energy to keep their respirators on at home. So we are looking at how, and we have already invested in individual homes as well. And making sure that they have energy resiliency, looking at supporting projects with some of our partners to energize fire departments and aqueducts as well, thinking about access to water as a part of your healthcare system. So, as we look at, as I mentioned at the beginning, health and public safety, your food access, community resiliency, we're trying to take a dynamic approach, but I'm gonna leave it there so that this noise doesn't keep interrupting.
Well, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and congrats to anybody who recently graduated or knows any recent graduates during this pandemic. And I just appreciate kind of some of the comments you have in terms of the cross-sectoral approach that you all are taking, and these points of intersection between community resilience and health and energy that you all at Hispanic Fed have targeted. I'd love to turn it over to you, Alejandra. I think we've got you on the line here on the phone. How has Resilient Power Puerto Rico been working towards resilient energy on the island, and how has COVID-19 changed your thinking or impacted your work?
I mean, from our perspective, we take resilience as a framework in terms of how you approach the compounded problems posed by climate change and what that means in a small island developing state like Puerto Rico, which means that it poses a current existential threat as opposed to the future existential threat that's so much talked about. And the COVID pandemic, which has been unprecedented in so many ways, has been similar to other major disasters in some key ways. One, it's gravely threatened the lives and livelihoods of populations that are precisely most susceptible to suffer the impact from those various types of hazards. So we have the populations that have already suffered the impact from hurricanes and the earthquakes, and the power outages are again the same populations that are most likely to suffer the impact from COVID. We're facing an exhausted, a situation where the already limited resources to protect those most susceptible groups and underserved communities had already been exhausted in that kind of compounded recovery process from Maria and the earthquakes. And in Puerto Rico, of course, the so-called fiscal crisis, which is, in fact, a going on 16-year recession, right? And it's also, the third thing it does is it tests the limits of government's capacities to adequately respond, right? And that's true for COVID. It's magnified in the context of COVID, but in many ways, it's true of all the other natural disasters that we face. In that respect, because our approach is resilience as a framework, it's kind of a way to address, a way to reduce the impact from those hazards and adapt to the fact that we will be continuously facing these. We believe that renewable, networked, and locally controlled energy systems are absolutely crucial to strengthen local disaster risk reduction capacity, right? So for us, solar energy is a tool to increase communities' capacities to assess, respond, recover, and prosper as they face these constant threats. And the way that solar energy does that, our understanding is, number one, of course, it ensures the continuity of critical social infrastructure, and it reduces unequal access to services. So to the extent that we are focusing on investing in those underserved, geographically remote communities that are most susceptible to impact from disaster, then we make sure that the clinics, the community pharmacies, and other frontline health services, but also social services and economic activity continue to operate in minimizing the impact from those disasters. At a second level, it frees up resources for preparedness and recovery by reducing energy costs and losses from resulting interruptions. So being able to keep up that economic activity means that you continue to generate an income, and that income can then be reinvested in preparedness and in recovery. And then it also, solar energy lays the foundation to understand climate adaptation and resilience at a systemic level more broadly. So Resilient Power Puerto Rico initially was focused on direct impact, and there was like a deployment of emergency systems, small 1.5 systems in community centers, which eventually became 5 kilowatt systems across 35 community centers, over 21 municipalities. We also distributed solar panels, over 200 solar panels directly. But as we were doing that work, we also started to try to figure out ways in which we could support communities to develop the capacities to kind of incubate their own solar energy systems and control that process and control that generation resource. So we developed 2 things. One was the Puerto Rico Energy Toolkit. It has a community vulnerability tool that really allows us to understand which communities are most vulnerable to the impact from disasters, so those that are most exposed, where they have the highest proportion of susceptible populations, and they have the least access to resources. And so in identifying those communities, we can really narrow down and focus our investment there. And we ran an incubation program. So we engaged more than 25 organizations, and 16 of those were able to run through the whole process of developing a pitch on their needs, the storytelling, and also developing proposals for their solar energy system. And within 4 months of those 16 proposals being developed, 3 of those community centers had already found funding to their proposal. So we're thinking a lot about how solar, it has an immediate impact in ensuring that continuity of services and in providing a resource to the community, but it's also a learning opportunity, an opportunity to learn laterally, to develop skills that then they're going to be able to use in the development of other projects and systems to strengthen their disaster risk recovery capacities.
Well, thank you so much, Alejandra, for kind of sharing that insight into y'all's process at Resilient Power Puerto Rico. And you at the beginning you mentioned that a lot of the communities who would face power outages are the same that are the most vulnerable to COVID-19. And this process that you all are doing through that toolkit and this incubation program to ensure that you're identifying these communities that are the most in need of, or who could benefit the most from resilient solar energy and microgrids is so important. And you have a few communities that are moving forward in that process, right? Where are they at in terms of their own process of potentially developing microgrids?
So we have, currently we have 3 projects that come out of the incubator. One is Cosao y Mutuado. Another is Siembra Los Tres Vidas, which is an agricultural project. Cosao is a health project. And because those proposals had been developed, we were able to establish a collaboration with the Council for Environmental Cooperation. It's like a NAFTA parallel organization, and they are providing the funding for these communities to either expand, well, basically in most cases, actually it's expansions of their systems so that they become energy resilience hubs for their communities. And there's going to be a collaborative design process whereby in collaboration with the communities, and a community energy resilience plan is going to be established. So a process to prioritize what the different needs, the community, specific needs the communities have in terms of energy in that post-disaster context, and then establish the mechanisms, the activities that will take place in the hub to address those post-disaster needs. We are in the planning and design process, just about to start installation on those centers, whilst in parallel, running other programs like the Critical Facilities Initiative with RMI and Rockefeller. That's about just bringing together capital and exploring, socially focused investments, sustainable investments to finance solar energy for those critical facilities, and then also the redevelopment of all the toolkits.
That's super exciting, and please keep us updated on how those community design processes go. Will, I'd love to turn it over to you. And I see you, it seems you're on the road. Footprint Project is always busy. So can you tell us a little bit about how Footprint Project has been responding to COVID-19? Of course, you all specialize in these rapidly deployable solar and storage trailers. How have you seen these be useful in this kind of current health crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry for the backdrop. And I am in Missouri. We are on our way to Florida with one of our solar trailers in preparation for hurricane season. And first of all, just thanks for putting this together. It's clearly some incredible folks doing incredible work, both on the panel and on the chat. So thanks for everyone for joining. You know, Footprint Projects is a super quick background, is a super small grassroots nonprofit that deploys mobile solar stations to disasters to help communities build back greener. We generally put batteries and panels on wheels and roll them around using a network of volunteers. Within COVID-19, we've seen kind of a, you know, the forever disaster begin, and I think for many communities in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, this is nothing new. But for, you know, the domestic U.S. or certain communities in the domestic U.S., we're now getting to that point where we're getting hit with recurring disasters, environmental, health, economic, social injustice, and so I think it's just, for us, we try to stay within our lane, so to speak, and we focus on assembling more mobile solar stations as fast as possible within specific vulnerable regions: southeast for hurricanes and floods, southwest for wildfires and PG&E outages, midwest for floods, and now everywhere for COVID, Puerto Rico for hurricanes and earthquakes, the recent earthquakes, and now COVID, obviously. The second piece for us is grow the database of existing solar systems that we may or may not own, but are in a region and could be deployable for emergency power outages, whether that's related to a COVID response or a outage that is now intertwined with the COVID issue. You know, firefighters in the Southwest are really, you know, having to think about how do we, you know, shelter in place versus bring people to a specific site if there are COVID concerns there. So we stay with, you know, mobilizing as many units as possible within a region, and then training volunteers and solar response team members to deploy and then manage and maintain those systems in partnership with first responders when there's an outage or when there's an emergency power need. I mean, I think there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle, and so at least in our case, we're gonna keep putting as many batteries and panels on wheels as fast as possible, and shuffling the checkerboard across the region.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Will. And keep us updated on how this goes, and where you end up on on this road trip. Rochelle, I'd love to take it back to you. In Turks and Caicos, you know, you all experienced Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. What lessons did Fortis TCI learn from the response and recovery to those storms, and what are you doing right now in preparation?
Yeah, we've learned a lot from the 2017 hurricanes. Basically, the Irma and Maria brought devastation on the islands, including Fortis TCI, TND network infrastructure. About 65% of our TND network were damaged and has to be restored. In about 1 month, we had Providenciales, South Caicos, North, and Middle Caicos almost 100% back in service, while it took us 2 months to fully restore all systems. That includes Grand Turk and Salt Key. Fortis TCI is operating in 7 service territories in Turks and Caicos Island. And then on the other hand, our generation plants were not damaged, only minor repairs in our building accessories. So it was not significant. And our office buildings which served as shelter for some of our personnel and family, and also served as our control command center, were all intact. No damage, and they served as well during and after the passage of hurricanes. What we've learned, so many things in many aspects of our operations. First, in terms of the restoration itself, we learned that quick system restoration is the key. So it helps the Turks and Caicos Island economy to be back in operation right away. So basically, we saved the tourist season that year. Hotels started to open up starting November, and tourist season was as business as usual in 2017 in Turks and Caicos. And then second is about communication. Communication system is really vital, especially that we are operating in service territories that are located in 7 islands. So, and also the local telecom companies were also damaged. So it was good that we have our own alternative communication medium available. We have satellites and radio units in place. We also have our what we call call tree procedures that we put in place just before the hurricane hit us. So we know when to start checking each other and who should start the ripple call effect until everyone is checked. And this is very important because after the hurricane, you don't know what happened to Grand Turk. And I think it took us like 24 hours before we were able to contact our personnel in our sister island. So
Wow.
it's not easy when you don't hear from, member of your company, but because we have the system in place, we were able to reach them through our own facilities, with our own communication tools. And then also what we learned is that for this TCI, whenever we're developing a project, we're always ensuring whether it's plant, T&D, any solar PV system, we're always incorporating the resiliency and hardening aspect in our project development so that, and so although our T&D network, some old parts were damaged, those that we've invested, those that are new and newly made, they stood still. And so as our plant, they were not damaged, our buildings were not damaged. They were made within the standard of category as 4 or 5. And then in terms of supplies and supply chain, we have this procedure that every year during when the hurricane season is coming, June 1st, we have to ensure that our inventories are in the level that's higher than usual. And of course, during that time, what we learned is that since lots of countries were damaged or devastated during that time, and many power utilities were also damaged, and their T&D or grid were damaged. So everybody has to go for the same needs, poles, wires. So what we learned is that to diversify our vendor and even the point of shipping. So our usual point of shipping is Florida, and during that time, even Florida was also in the threat of hurricane. So with that's a big lessons learned. So diversify our vendors as well as the shipping point, and then again, embedding business continuity management within the organization is very important. I think we can only prepare as much as we can, but in the end, we cannot really say how strong the hurricane will be. It will behave when, we don't know how it will behave when it arrives. Will it pass quickly? Will it stay for a while? Or how much impact it will leave after passing? And in the case of 2017 hurricanes, we did not expect that in just 2 weeks after Irma, Maria is coming. So that was out of our scenario preparation. So in that case, we learned for our business continuity management process is that, there are many scenarios that we have to look after and that we have to prepare. So therefore, no matter how much we are prepared, we still not certain, and we could not say that we prepared and so we will be fine. However, having an organized way or organized approach of preparing for hurricane gives some level of assurance for the personnel, for the customers, for the stakeholders, for the whole organization, and even for the leaders of the company. Because when we are confident, because of this systematic approach of preparation, we were confident to say that we prepared all aspects of our operations, and we our operations and our infrastructure based on the best practices with utmost diligence. And before the hurricane hit us in 2017, we were actually preparing our system for ISO 22301 Business Continuity Management certification that year. So we weren't able to complete that process because of hurricane, but basically all our preparation were really tested even before we undergone the certification. So we are conducting every year we are conducting our hurricane drills. We're always checking our facilities in preparation for hurricane. Before June 1st, we already completed our list of checklists for hurricane preparation. And in 2018, we were certified, we get our certification for ISO 22301. So it was easy for us. Besides that we prepared, it was tested by natural calamity. So it was easy for us to get that certification. We were really ready. And another thing that we learned from 2017 hurricanes is the leadership. We need confident and decisive leadership to handle such big event and to organize well even the preparation up to the response, and having this leader to know how to empower as well the sub leaders or that were put in the system. So those are the things that some of the things that we learned. There are many more, but I think those are the top things that we learned from hurricanes 2017 and 2017 hurricanes.
Wow. Well, yeah, you all certainly have a wealth of lived experience to this effect. And that sounds just tremendously scary to not be able to even contact your own colleagues in Grand Turk in that situation.
Yeah.
And I know renewables has been a part of the picture for you all as well. You know, a lot of people know that one of your first systems that you all installed actually survived the storm, right? And so you learned a lot about kind of hardening solar infrastructure for Category 5 winds, right?
Yes, actually, 2 months before Hurricane Irma arrived, we just commissioned our first distributed solar PV. So it's about like 170 kW. It's on our customers' property, and when Hurricane Irma arrived, it stood still. Maybe we only lost like 2 panels. So basically, all the assessment, all the preparation, all the inclusion of resilience and hardening in developing our projects, we benefited from it. Some items that we learned, for example, because that was our first baby, basically solar PV, we thought that if we will take off, for example, the inverter, we will be able to save the inverter. But actually, after, since we touched the system and some kind of water ingress happened in the system, we weren't able to use the warranty. So those one of the learnings that from that hurricane and taking care of the PV system. And also another thing that happened there, though the system withstand the Category 5 hurricanes, after the event, we noticed that the solar panels were one by one missing. So, another thing that we learn is that we have to ensure that there is good physical security for the system, because on the times like that, people think that they can use the solar PV because that area where our system was installed, it was one of the place where maybe we were able to power it after 45 days. So, so those are the things that, we're now watching out whenever there's some kind of calamity or things like that. We're also putting in place some physical security for our system.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, a couple of different aspects of resiliency there. that are super important to consider. So I want to kind of take it to this broader question that a lot of folks have been talking about in terms of the economic impact of COVID-19 in the Caribbean being so severe. And some folks have been kind of theorizing around how green jobs or potentially renewable energy could be a part of that recovery. Would any one of our panelists like to speak to that question about the potential for renewable energy as a pillar of the recovery?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, COVID in many ways, in the worst way possible, actually has magnified all of our weaknesses and accentuated the inequality and our vulnerability to the impact from these disasters and crises, right? Again, you know, as with other disasters, renewable, sustainable, you know, and more broadly, knowledge-driven industries could and should be a part of our regional economic recovery strategy, right? That being said, it's fundamental that the growth of renewable energy or the green economy sector, in order to generate growth and sustainable development in the Caribbean and for the Caribbean, it will have to explicitly, you know, be driven by investments that are based on local needs, right? That respond to local needs, the interests and those communities' visions, those countries, islands' visions for sustainable and equitable development. They must explicitly explore how to institutionalize networked and decentralized locally controlled generation. In Puerto Rico, it was clear after Maria that the restoration process was as unequal, if not more unequal, than, you know, the impact of the disaster itself or the underlying local conditions. So RPPR, one of the things we did is we created a data set of how power was restored for the final 30%. And when we're talking about the final 30% of clients, we're talking about the people whose power was restored between 4 to 7 months after the hurricane, okay? And when you map those dots, those communities, day by day as their power is being restored, and you overlay that with underlying socioeconomic conditions or already existing access to capital or the resources for recovery, you see a compounded effect. So the communities that already had the most challenging initial conditions, the least access to resources, were the ones to see their power restored last. In that respect, decentralized, locally controlled generation is fundamental if it's going to become a catalyst for economic recovery and impact our communities that are most vulnerable and that have been most excluded from growth, from economic growth in general. And it also means that the development of an endogenous energy sector is a priority. This means integrating local actors in all aspects of the renewable energy sector development process. We know, and these are very popular, so workforce development programs for labor as an income generating opportunity, sure, but also supporting small and medium enterprises locally that are suppliers, that are designers, planners, and managers of these energy systems. It's the only way that the development of renewable energy sector actually generates multiplier effects in the economy and is a catalyst for more equitable development as opposed to potentially becoming an exacerbating factor in terms of inequity.
Thank you so much. And that is so critical, that point that you just touched on, that we need to make sure that renewables are that catalyst for equitable development and investment rather than the opposite. Charlotte, I would love to turn it back to you. And potentially related to this topic of workforce development, how are you all at Hispanic Federation thinking about the importance of capacity building and workforce development as a major part of this energy resilience strategy?
Sure. Well, I think that was an excellent answer that was already given in terms of thinking about workforce development as it relates to social justice and development in Puerto Rico. We have already, in terms of organizations that we've funded, that's been one of our approaches to funding, is really thinking about how do we support the development of local talent in terms of supporting these systems. One of the organizations that we've been able to support who's doing that is Solar Libre. And so they have specifically been working to train people in through apprenticeship programs, paid apprenticeship programs here in Puerto Rico, to be able to take jobs and leadership roles within the energy environment. I think overall, in terms of our perspective on economic development in Puerto Rico, sort of similar to what was already said, we really believe that all of these funds that are coming in for the recovery really should be going to local organizations and local businesses, and looking at how all of that investment can stay on the island, and that includes within the solar energy sector, right? How do we make sure that it's the local businesses who are able to take those? How do we make sure there's enough expertise here and people who can take the jobs? And we have heard that that has been one of the challenges. And Solar Libre specifically has shared, that's I don't want to say they're my words, but that as they are training people, they're immediately being hired by companies here in Puerto Rico who have said that they have struggled for a long time to find people who can take those roles. So I think that's just one very sort of specific example of workforce development. Again, and I think the funds that are coming in through these recovery dollars really do need to go and think about things like solar energy. There's right now there's community development, block grant, disaster recovery funds available specifically for workforce development and technology jobs. And I do think it's very important that some of those funds go to local organizations here to train people up in these roles. Another one of our concerns in general is making sure that specifically as we're continuing to invest in communities and setting up these systems, that the people in the communities know how to run their systems, how to maintain their systems, and thinking about, again, not just coming in as many of us did, right, at the beginning, which was we want to get people energy as quickly as possible. So it was in many ways at the beginning a top-down approach to just coming in, putting in a system and kind of going to the next one, right? And in terms of long-term continuity of these projects, that is not something that's going to create a sustainable energy project, right? We need to make sure that we are including education on how systems work, on how to maintain the systems, on long-term planning around your systems, including the fact that, and sort of calling it Jonathan Castillo, who works for our team, he leads all of our energy projects, has made it a big deal to ensure that education, as we continue to support projects, education is a key part, and also thinking about how do we think about the waste, right? We think about our energy as clean energy when we're thinking about solar, but one of the concerns that he's brought up, and also thinking about it in terms of workforce development, is what happens to all these batteries. Puerto Rico right now does not necessarily have the infrastructure to recycle all of those batteries. So what sort of opportunities are there to develop innovative companies here in Puerto Rico to think about recycling, right, as it relates to our energy? And who can be the ones to lead that? And that's a question that he's asked on multiple occasions. And I think it's an opportunity for local business development as well, that's going to address the waste that this is going to produce, and making sure that communities understand what is the waste this is going to produce, what is the investment 3 to 5 years later that they're going to have to make to replace those batteries. And so all of that, I think, needs to be added as we think about not just in terms of economic development, but just the sustainability, making sure that in Puerto Rico, people here have the knowledge long term, and that it isn't, a lot of our organizations have come in with the best of intentions to bring in systems, but then leave. And then we don't leave that knowledge behind, or we don't make sure that that knowledge is coming from within, or growing endogenously, as use the word that was used before. So I think that's something that we're improving on, right? And ensuring that as we fund projects around work around solar energy, that we incorporate that into those projects as well, or that we make sure that the nonprofit organization who's leading that work, right, that they're incorporating that in. And so it's an area that we've been working to improve, and looking at how that workforce development can be a stronger part. It's been a part of the work that we've done, but how do we strengthen that piece of the areas of the projects that we end up supporting?
Yeah, and
100%.
Might I just add that it's a lot also about thinking about underserved communities and vulnerable communities, not as beneficiaries of our help, but as our partners, as innovators, as economic agents in the fullest sense of the word. So it's about, rather than embedding oneself in the solutions, finding ways to increasingly decouple from the solutions, because we are eliminating the barriers to capital or to decision-making structures that currently are the obstacle for those communities to control their recovery, to control their sustainable development, and lay that vision for what they want to see their future look like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alejandra. So thanks so much to our panelists for that initial conversation. We've got about 10 minutes left to go to this Q&A portion of the conversation. So as a reminder, if any of the attendees have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A function on the Zoom chat. Just first off, I do see a message in here from Vieques Love. Will, do you want to talk a little bit about some of Footprint Project's work in Vieques and anything else you're working on in Puerto Rico?
Sure, I will. Happy to talk about our work. It's I think small projects comparative to I think some of the incredible more permanent infrastructure solar battery storage projects that have been developed by other panelists and other folks in this participants on this call. So I want to take our programs with a grain of salt, right? But we did work with a bunch of partners to develop a mobile solar trailer for the Office of Emergency Management of Vieques. And I'd say that it's live, it's being tested, trained on. It's been a totally grassroots, project. We don't have the capacity to keep paid staff in Puerto Rico or hire people in Puerto Rico to manage these systems. So it's really become hey, we can get this far, and then we have to train people locally on, hey, what happens when the beeping starts on the inverter, or what flip this breaker here and then try plugging in. We do a lot of remote consult if necessary, and then have local experts or folks that we can draw in to kind of troubleshoot as needed. And then I guess for going forward in preparation for hurricane season, we're working with Empowered by Light to develop a new solar trailer that will be on mainland Puerto Rico, slightly larger than the Vieques mobile unit. And that we're hoping, it's basically we see it as kind of a race against time to get these things, assembled, integrated, out the door, into the hands of the folks that can deploy them, and then make sure those folks are trained at least up to a minimum level where they can hitch the thing to a truck, drive it up and figure out how to, flip the switch to plug it in. I mean, we really think that these systems, no one gets trained on how to buy a generator at Home Depot and fill it up with gas and oil, right? Like, you don't need no one takes the YouTube video. We all know how to do that. So I think there's half of it's getting the turnkey tech, assembly process down, so it can be as easy as, dragging these things out, plugging the panels in, and plugging into you know, a mobile solar electric generator. And then the other half is thinking about your energy use. And I think that's really the one of the pieces of the puzzle that is the barrier to a lot of folks being able to, you know, assemble or pull a solar generator off a shelf and use it regularly, and understand that, hey, if you plug 10 coffee makers in at 9 p.m. and you have a 2 kilowatt battery bank, you're going to last 15 minutes, right? So I think there's a few pieces of the puzzle that are still waiting to be solved, but at least in our case, we assemble and deploy, and then those training capacity building pieces, if we can't do it in person, we dial in, and you know, it's totally based on local partnerships.
Thanks so much, Will. I have another question here related to that somebody asked related to investment. You know, I'm curious, how are you all kind of seeing the investment landscape change with COVID-19? And how does that kind of change capital deployment for renewables? You know, whether that's funding or financing. So I think a lot of the attendees on the call are probably grappling with some of those similar issues.
Is that for someone specific? Us?
No, anybody please jump in. Charlotte, do you wanna start?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of investment, our work is when we support a community, it's generally done through philanthropic. There's not financing done or anything like that with us. But I can say overall, because Hispanic Federation is a bit of a hybrid, we both fund, but we are also a nonprofit organization where we try to channel funding through us to organizations here in Puerto Rico. And so I can say with COVID-19 and how things have been impacted, I think we have seen a great response in terms of philanthropy interested in supporting COVID-19. But I think one of the challenges with philanthropy overall, and again, not speaking about other types of investments, just philanthropy, is it often kind of chases the emergency. Right, and so as the emergency location shifts, so does the funding interest, or as the topic shifts. So big outpouring of support after Hurricane Maria, big outpourings of support after the earthquake to support the earthquake, big outpouring now asking how do we support the COVID-19. And so sometimes these then long-term projects or long-term recovery projects get set aside as philanthropy moves to kind of a new target. And speaking only for the experience from Puerto Rico, I think one of the challenges with Puerto Rico that has been talked about before is the fact that when it came to Puerto Rico, because of our status as a territory colony, we have the challenge of a lot of funders, US-based funders specifically, saw Puerto Rico as international, and then would say, well, historically we only focus on domestic philanthropy, and so Puerto Rico was left out. And then other funders who said, no, we only focus on international, and Puerto Rico is domestic. And so, again, speaking from that context of US-based philanthropy, Puerto Rico was caught in a catch-22. And that, a lot of philanthropy decided to change that in response to Hurricane Maria and made special arrangements to fund Puerto Rico after that, but have not necessarily made the switch to include Puerto Rico in their long-term philanthropic plans to ensure that they continue supporting organizations here on the island for more than just that emergency. And certainly these energy projects, although they can be an emergency response, right? As Footprint Project was talking about, they can come in, there's all sorts of innovative ways to use it immediately after an emergency. a lot of the projects that we're talking about when we're thinking about preparation or really changing systems are going to require investments that come after the emergency and attention that is more long-term. And then thinking about, again, as I mentioned, if you're supporting a nonprofit in a couple of years down the line, or a community, right? A community to put in a grid, making sure that either they have a plan or philanthropy has committed to support them years down the line when they need to replace those batteries or the system needs maintenance, right? Because otherwise you've left a community or nonprofit without that support to fund it. Many communities and nonprofits have been creative and are creating models to come up with ways to kind of fund it themselves, the most cooperative model. So it's not that philanthropy is the answer or federal funds is the answer, but certainly philanthropy as a sector can think about how do they create more responsible funding models once you've come in and you've supported these or made these initial investments in communities, in public infrastructure, in nonprofits, to make sure that they can be successful long term. And I think with COVID, the switch has been an immediate one to COVID-19 support, which is critical and important. But I also, again, worry because the economy overall has been impacted. We saw this after other disasters that impacted the entire United States, such as after September 11th, a lot of nonprofit organizations shut down because philanthropy tightened their belts. So instead of investing more and making sure that nonprofits stay alive when they are so vital to the long-term economic recovery, the long-term health recovery of communities, instead of more, they tightened, right? Because they saw losses in their portfolios, or whatever the correct term is, right? And so we saw that when you had a national impact. We see that after the recession, where if depending on what the economic outcome of COVID-19 is, we may see that again. And I think it is incumbent on the sector to say we're not going to do that again. We are going to instead recognize that if we want a strong economic recovery, if we want long-term health recovery, we can't tighten. We need to continue to put funds out to support, and that's how we're going to be able to recover.
Well, thank you for making that case.
Briefly, super agree with everything that Charlotte has been mentioning, and I think it's imperative that we consider that also in terms of deployment. Given the acute inequalities that have been apparent in terms of the impact on communities from COVID on the basis of income, race, and availability of services, we have the moral responsibility to reconsider the prioritization and design of our initiatives in response to that, right? I don't think we can go through a process like COVID where a lot has been said about it being the great equalizer, but in fact, when we look at the numbers in terms of impact, the likelihood that one will die from COVID, which is the ultimate consequence, is significantly different depending on the neighborhood you live in, the color of your skin, your level of income, and your access to resources. And I think that anything we do moving forward has to explicitly find ways to address those inequities as a means to build resilience to this pandemic, but also all future disasters.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alejandra. And we're pretty much out of time, but Rochelle, I would love to turn it over to you for just a final question. How has kind of COVID-19 impacted some of Fortis TCI's thinking on renewables? And what are some of your plans for renewables going forward? I know we've talked about this quite a bit.
Yes, so this pandemic event is really challenging for utility right now. So I actually just read the report from EIA Energy Information Agency that globally electricity demand decreased by 2.5% in the first quarter alone. That was when the whole world was just in partial lockdown, and then further reduction for big countries of about 15% to 20%. And now in Turks and Caicos, our load actually decreased by 30 to 40% in April and in May. So this effect, this impact of lower consumption in average affects has many effects in utility. One, liquidity. So with this liquidity challenge, we have to cut some of our capex. One, beginning this year, we were aiming for our distributed generation installation under our utility-owned renewable energy program of about 2 megawatts. Plus, we have this, project that we've been working, the 1 megawatt utility scale. But then because of the effect of this pandemic, we have to cut our project, renewable energy project, to only 500 kW this year. And then at the same time, this lower demand has an impact or will pose a question on, do we need to add capacity if you have lower load? So with this, I think for this one, we need to wait and see like what the load forecast will be in the coming years. We actually just completed our integrated resource plan through RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute facilitated it, and we have this report, ARNET's report last year that was approved by the government cabinet here and our board, and now we have to review it or renew it right away because we have to now set based on the impact to see what is the long-term, load forecast. And based on that, that is only when we can say, okay, we can add capacity. And that additional capacity, that is where we can base how much renewable energy we can add. Before pandemic, our RNETs or IRP result is that by the next 5 years, we should have about 10 megawatts additional for our RE, or 33% share by 2040 for renewable energy. But now we have to check, based on this impact, what it is. So this pandemic event really disturbed many things in the utility sector. In our industry, we are already lots of disruptions, and now pandemic disrupted the disrupted industry. But then, even in the midst of this pandemic, we know that the implications of this pandemic for power utility system and the clean energy transition are still evolving. Nonetheless, the energy trilemma has not changed. We still need secure, least cost, and reliable power supply. So, and also, I believe that renewable energy will really play a good role in having a resilient power system and sustainable. And this resilient power system, it's very crucial and more indispensable during this pandemic period, and as well as in post-pandemic world. So we still have to see what's ahead, but we know that it's challenging, but we're up to, our commitment to RE implementation and having this least cost energy for Turks and Caicos Island are still here, and pandemic or not.
Well, thank you, Rochelle, for that very realistic kind of assessment and sharing of that kind of evolving state of challenges that you all are facing in Turks and Caicos, and exciting to hear you all kind of are remaining committed to this as the situation evolves. So, Charlotte, yeah.
Well, I know you said we're out of time, so I wanted to at least make an invitation to anyone who's on from Puerto Rico. One of the areas I didn't mention that we work on is energy policy, and we are very concerned about the negotiations of the, Rochelle just mentioned it, the Integrated Resource Plan in Puerto Rico, as well as the Restructuring Support Agreement in Puerto Rico, which is negotiating the debt. And we have been doing quite a lot of policy advocacy on that. So anyone who is interested in engaging with us on that, I'm going to share the email of our Director of Public Policy there in the chat, and they can email her and engage with us, particularly to some of the points that Alejandro was making around the inequities of energy here in Puerto Rico. A lot of it can be traced back also to some of the ways policies are set up and the ways that we're seeing the policies around the recovery fund and the debt and the new resource plan. So I just want to put out that invitation. I know there wasn't time to really dig into what the concerns were, but I want to invite folks to participate with us.
That is very appreciated. So that email is in the chat, and if anybody else wants that email for Charlotte's colleague at Hispanic Federation, please reach out to CGI. If anybody else has any other questions for the panelists or for all of us at the Action Network, feel free to shoot those over via email. And so I think with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thanks, Rochelle. Thanks, Will. And thanks, Alejandra. This has been a very, very interesting conversation with a lot of some of the major concerns and current evolving state of energy right now and during COVID-19 discussed. So definitely appreciate your contributions and your time. I'm looking forward to talking to you all soon.
Thank you all for the invitation and everyone who listened in.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.